To the locals of Havenwood, she was just Ava, the quiet waitress. They never saw the calculated precision in her movements or heard the silent combat drills she practiced at dawn. But her past was coming for her. Ava Thorne existed in the quiet spaces of Havenwood, Colorado, and that was a matter of survival. The town was a postcard, tucked into a fold of the Rocky Mountains, a place where the scent of pine was the local currency and the gossip was as warm and predictable as the morning coffee. For 8 years, she had been a ghost in this paradise, the silent waitress at the Whispering Pines Cafe. She knew Sheriff Brody Evans took his coffee black with 1 sugar, that Martha Jensen, the cafe's owner, had a soft spot for stray dogs, and that the logging crews were always loudest on a Friday. They knew her as Ava, the woman with the ash blonde hair pulled into a tight, no-nonsense bun and eyes the color of a frozen lake. That was all they were ever meant to know. Her movements were a study in efficiency, a ballet of contained energy that the locals mistook for quiet diligence. The way she could carry 4 plates without a tremor, the way her eyes scanned every person who walked through the door, the way she never, ever sat with her back to an entrance. These were details lost on people who saw only what they expected to see. But before the first rays of sun crested the snow-capped peaks, while Havenwood slept, a different Ava emerged. In the biting pre-dawn cold, behind her secluded cabin, the sound was not of a woman preparing for a shift, but of disciplined, silent violence. The crunch of snow under combat boots, the whisper of a blade cutting through the air, the thud of precise strikes against a weather training post. These were the rituals of a life she had supposedly left behind. Ava was 30, but she moved with the weary grace of someone who had lived a dozen lifetimes, most of them in places that didn't appear on any map. Her uniform, simple black jeans, a faded green t-shirt for the cafe, and sturdy boots, was a costume designed for invisibility. It concealed a roadmap of scars across her back and shoulders, pale white lines that told stories of shrapnel and sacrifice, stories no waitress should ever have to tell. The town had its theories, of course. Martha Jensen, a woman whose warmth was as constant as the mountain sun, believed Ava was escaping a dark past, a violent ex-husband perhaps. Sheriff Brody Evans, a former Army man himself, saw something else. He saw the discipline, the situational awareness that was too sharp, too ingrained. He'd run her name when she first arrived, Ava Thorne. The records were clean, almost too clean. A social security number, a birth certificate from a hospital that had burned down, a work history that was plausible but impossible to verify. It felt manufactured, a carefully constructed fiction. He'd once asked her, "Ever serve, Ava?" She just smiled, a sad, distant thing that didn't reach her ice-blue eyes. "Just coffee, Sheriff," she'd replied, and the conversation was over. What none of them could ever imagine was the truth buried beneath the floorboards of her simple, rustic cabin, concealed behind a false wall in the root cellar. Protected by layers of electromagnetic shielding, was a space that defied the quiet simplicity of her life. It was a concrete-lined bunker, an arsenal that would make a Delta Force team envious. Racks of customized firearms, a SIG MCX rifle, a Glock 19 with a threaded barrel, a high-caliber sniper system, were meticulously maintained. Encrypted communication arrays hummed with latent power, connected to satellite networks that were officially decommissioned. Survival gear, medical kits, and a packed go bag sat ready for a day she prayed would never arrive. On the far wall, hanging in a place of grim honor, was a tactical vest. It was worn, stained with the memory of sweat and sand. Stitched into the collar, in faded black thread, was a single word: Echo. It was a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 8 years. It was the call sign of a ghost, a Tier 1 operator who officially died in a sandstorm during a mission gone dark. Every Sunday night, when the cafe was closed and the town was asleep, Ava would descend into that cold, sterile space. She'd run drills in the near darkness, her hands moving over the cold steel of her weapons with the intimate familiarity of a lover's touch. The mask of Ava Thorne, the quiet waitress, would peel away. In those moments, She wasn't the woman who knew how much cream to put in Mrs. Gable's tea. She was Chief Petty Officer Ava Thorne, a weapon forged in the fires of clandestine warfare, a woman trained to kill without a sound and vanish without a trace. She was Echo, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that echoes never truly fade. They just wait for the right moment to be heard again. The storm rolled in from the west, a bruised purple mass of clouds that swallowed the peaks of the Rockies. It was a Tuesday morning, and the air in Havenwood was thick with the smell of ozone and impending rain. Inside the Whispering Pines Cafe, the atmosphere was cozy, a stark contrast to the brewing tempest outside. The clink of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, and the rich aroma of coffee and bacon created a bubble of normalcy. But for Ava, the pressure drop in the atmosphere mirrored a tension coiling deep in her gut. It was an old feeling, the sixth sense that had kept her alive in places where survival was measured in seconds. It was the feeling of being watched. She refilled Sheriff Evans's mug for the third time, her movements smooth and automatic, but her senses were stretched taut, scanning the world beyond the cafe's large picture windows. That's when she saw them. They weren't local vehicles. Not the mud-splattered Ford F-150s of the loggers or the sensible Subarus of the townfolk. These were three identical black GMC Yukons, their tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. They moved with a chilling synchronicity, maintaining perfect tactical spacing as they navigated the winding mountain road into Havenwood. They had no front license plates. Their presence screamed federal, or something that operated above it. Ava's hand, holding the glass coffee pot, didn't so much as twitch, but inside her, a cascade of silent alarms went off. 8 years of absolute radio silence. 8 years of being a ghost. It had just ended. Her mind, a finely tuned combat computer, began running through protocols. Under the main counter, concealed from view, was a small, unmarked button. Pressing it would trigger a thermite charge in her basement, incinerating everything. The weapons, the comms, the last vestiges of Echo. It would also send a single, encrypted burst transmission to a number that hadn't been active in nearly a decade, initiating an escape plan she had rehearsed 1,000 times. Her thumb itched. The urge to press it, to vanish into the wilderness she knew as well as her own scars, was overwhelming. But her training held her back. Running blind was a rookie mistake. You never run until you know what you're running from, and who is doing the hunting. Information was ammunition. She needed to know their objective, their capabilities, and most importantly, if they knew they were hunting Echo. Expecting someone? Sheriff Evans's voice was a low rumble. He'd followed her gaze, his old cop instincts picking up on the anomaly of the black SUVs. Never, Sheriff, Ava replied, her voice even and calm. A perfect mask for the storm raging inside her. Probably just some government surveyors. They come through here every few years to count the trees. Brody grunted, not entirely convinced. Surveyors usually drive white trucks, and they don't drive like they're about to invade a small country. The Yukons didn't stop at the cafe. They continued into the heart of the small town, disappearing around the bend near the town hall. But they weren't just passing through. Ava knew their pattern. It was a classic reconnaissance sweep. They were establishing a perimeter, mapping the layout, identifying key locations. They were preparing the battlefield. The carefully constructed piece of her life was shattering. The ghost she had buried was stirring. For 8 years, Ava Thorne had served coffee and smiled politely. She had built a life, a fragile but real thing, in the quiet heart of the mountains. Now, the past was coming to reclaim its own. The thunder that rumbled across the valley wasn't just the storm. It was the sound of an old war, her war, arriving at her doorstep. And as she stood there, coffee pot in hand, surrounded by the oblivious townspeople who were her only shield, Ava knew one thing for certain. When they came for Echo, they wouldn't be coming to talk. The black Yukons had vanished, but their presence lingered in the air like the metallic tang of lightning. The morning rush at the cafe continued, a river of normalcy that Ava navigated with practiced ease. She took orders, cleared tables, and manage the small talk, all while a cold, hard part of her brain was methodically disassembling the threat. The sweep was phase 1. Phase 2 would be the probe. It would be subtle, designed to test her reactions without revealing their hand. She didn't have to wait long. At 10:15, the bell above the door chimed, admitting 2 men who did not belong in Havenwood. They were dressed in the rugged attire of geological surveyors, flannel shirts, sturdy hiking boots, and canvas jackets. They carried themselves with a casual confidence, but Ava's trained eye saw through the facade in an instant. It was in the details. The way their gaze swept the room, cataloging exits and occupants in a single, fluid motion. The slight, unnatural bulge under the left arm of the taller man's jacket. The way the shorter one chose a booth that gave him a clear line of sight to both the front and back doors. They were operators, and they were good. "Morning, ma'am," the taller one said, his smile easy and disarming. He had a faint southern accent. "Heard you folks have the best coffee this side of Denver." "We do our best," Ava replied, her own smile perfectly calibrated to be welcoming but not overly friendly. She approached their table, coffee pot in hand. "Just passing through?" "Something like that," the shorter man chimed in. His eyes were sharp, analytical. "We're with the USGS, surveying some of the old mining claims up in the high country. We were told there's some interesting history around here. Stories about people who found their way to this place, looking for a quiet life after extensive travels." The phrase was a hook, baited and cast with precision. Extensive travels. It was coded language, a soft probe designed to see if she would bite. Ava poured their coffee, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. "Well, the Rockies have a way of calling to people who like their privacy," she said, her tone light and conversational. "We get all sorts here. Folks running from bad weather or bad decisions. Can't say I know too many with extensive travels." She kept her focus on the task, the perfect picture of a small-town waitress. The taller man leaned forward slightly. "We're particularly interested in people with specialized backgrounds. Maybe folks who served in the military. Heard this area has a few veteran communities, especially for those who were involved in, let's say, special projects." The probe was getting sharper. They were narrowing the field. Ava's heart rate remained a steady 60 beats per minute. On the outside, she was calm. On the inside, Echo was analyzing, calculating. She needed to test them back. As she refilled their cups, she made a calculated move, a tiny, almost imperceptible stumble. A small amount of scalding coffee splashed from the pot onto the back of the shorter man's hand. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry," she exclaimed, her voice filled with genuine-sounding alarm. She grabbed a napkin, dabbing at his hand. A normal person would yelp, or at least flinch violently. The man barely reacted. There was a slight tightening of his jaw, a momentary flicker in his eyes, but his hand remained perfectly still. It was the pain response of a man conditioned by years of rigorous training. He was hardwired. "It's nothing, ma'am. No harm done," he said, his voice even. But he knew, and he knew that she knew. A silent message had been passed between them in that split second of spilled coffee. Ava backed away, her face a mask of worried apology, but her mind was racing. They had confirmed her suspicions. Now, she had confirmed theirs. The game had changed. The taller man decided to press one last time. "We heard a story about a woman who used to be a real ghost. An echo in the mountains, you might say. Ever hear any local legends like that?" He said the name. Echo. He said it casually, a fishing line cast into the deep, dark water of her past. For a fraction of a second, the world tilted. The clatter of the diner, the smell of coffee, it all faded away, replaced by the memory of sand and gunfire. But she held on. The mask of Ava Thorne did not crack. She gave a small, confused laugh. "An echo? Honey, in these mountains you hear echoes all the time. Comes with the territory." She smiled sweetly. "Now, can I get you boys some pie? The apple crumble is fresh out of the oven." The 2 men exchanged a look. The probe was over. The taller one left a $50 bill on the table for 2 cups of coffee. A message. "We know who you are, and we can afford to be generous." As they walked out and got into a nondescript sedan parked across the street, Ava watched them go. They would report back that the asset was aware that the target was hard. Phase 2 was complete. Phase 3 would be the confrontation. It would not be subtle. The air in the cafe grew heavy, charged with the unspoken tension of the coming storm, and the confrontation Ava knew was imminent. The two surveyors were gone, but they had left a psychic crater in their wake. Martha, bustling out from the kitchen, noticed the change immediately. "Everything all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a long morning, Martha," Ava lied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. The lie didn't have long to live. At 11 a.m., the 3 black Yukons returned. This time, they didn't perform a slow pass. They pulled directly into the cafe's gravel parking lot, executing a perfect 3-point turn that boxed in the few remaining customer vehicles. The maneuver was tactical, precise, and utterly terrifying in its intent. It was a containment strategy. Doors opened in unison, and 8 men disembarked. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, jackets, boots, but they moved like a single, lethal organism. They were a hunter-killer team, and their posture, their focus, their systematic scanning of the environment screamed special operations. The bell above the door chimed, a sound that was usually cheerful, but now sounded like a death knell. The man who entered first was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. But it was the man behind him who made Ava's breath catch in her throat, who made the world slow to a crawl. Commander Caleb "Cal" Mitchell. He was older now, the lines around his eyes deeper, his dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. But the way he carried himself, the fluid confidence, the gravitational pull of his presence, that was unchanged. He was a ghost from her past, the man who had been her team leader, her mentor, her friend. And now he was here, in her sanctuary. His eyes, a deep, piercing blue, swept the room and landed on her. For a heartbeat, his professional mask faltered. She saw it, a flicker of shock, of recognition, of something that looked dangerously like regret. 8 years, 8 lifetimes, collapsed into a single, silent moment across a small town diner. The few remaining locals froze, their coffee cups paused halfway to their lips. The easy morning chatter died, suffocated by the sudden, crushing weight of the newcomer's presence. Sheriff Brody Evans, sensing a situation spiraling far beyond a traffic stop, pushed himself up from his booth. His hand moved instinctively, resting on the worn grip of his service pistol. He was outgunned and outmanned, but this was his town, and these were his people. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Brody's voice was steady, a rock against the rising tide of tension. Cal Mitchell's gaze never left Ava, but he addressed the sheriff. "Just looking for a cup of coffee." And a conversation. His voice was calm, controlled, but it carried an authority that resonated in the bones. "Heard this place serves the best in the county." Martha, wiping her hands on her apron, stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "Well, you heard right. Ava, honey, get these men seated. Find them a table." The use of her name, her cover, in his presence, was a dissonant chord in a symphony of lies. Ava watched Cal process it, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The legendary operator he had mourned, the ghost he was hunting, was a waitress named Ava. She picked up a coffee pot, her hand steady through sheer force of will, and walked towards them. Each step was a lifetime. As she approached, she could see his team subtly shifting, their positions forming a loose but inescapable cordon around her. They were cutting off her escape routes. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice the perfect imitation of Ava Thorne, the waitress. Cal looked at her, truly looked at her, and the years seemed to melt away. He could see echo beneath the civilian facade. "We're not here for coffee, Ava," he said, his voice dropping, meant for her alone. "We're here on a matter of national security." The words, though quiet, landed like a grenade in the small cafe. National security? Sheriff Evans stepped forward, his hand now firmly on his weapon. "In my town? I'm gonna need to see some identification, and you're gonna need to tell me exactly what the hell is going on." Cal slowly reached into his jacket, producing a leather folder and handing it to Brody. "Commander Caleb Mitchell, Naval Special Warfare." We're operating on direct orders. This is a matter of urgent military importance. Brody examined the credentials. They were real, but his loyalty wasn't to a plastic card. It was to the people of Havenwood, and to the quiet woman who had served him coffee every morning for 8 years. This doesn't give you jurisdiction here, Commander. Whatever you think she is here, she's one of mine. The protective gesture, the simple, powerful statement, almost made Ava's mask crack. These people, who knew nothing about her, were willing to stand between her and a team of Navy SEALs. "Sheriff, I appreciate your position," Cal said, his tone respectful but firm. "But we are not here to cause trouble. We just need to speak with someone who has information vital to preventing a catastrophic failure of U.S. intelligence." His eyes locked back onto Avis. Information that only one person could have. The trap was sprung. The walls were closing in. Her carefully built world was about to be burned to the ground. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her. Cal took a small step closer. He lowered his voice, so only she could hear it, a whisper that was louder than a gunshot. "It's time to come home, Echo." The name hung in the air, a ghost made of sound. Echo. It shattered the illusion of Ava Thorne completely. The diner, the coffee pot in her hand, the concerned faces of Martha and Brody. It all seemed to recede, replaced by the white-hot intensity of Cal Mitchell's gaze. "That's enough," Brody's voice boomed, trying to reclaim control. "I don't know what fantasy world you're living in, Commander, but this is Ava Thorne. She's a waitress, for God's sake." "It's okay, Brody." The voice that spoke was not Ava's. It was deeper, colder, stripped of all warmth and hesitation. It was the voice of Echo. The transformation was terrifying in its subtlety. Her posture shifted, a fractional alignment that radiated coiled strength. Her grip on the coffee pot eased, her fingers now relaxed and ready. Her eyes, once guarded, were now chillingly clear, analytical, and utterly lethal. The nervous waitress had vanished, and in her place stood a warrior. Martha's face went pale. "Ava, honey, what are they talking about?" Ava finally looked away from Cal, her gaze softening for a moment as she met the eyes of the woman who had been her friend, her protector. The weight of her 8-year deception was a physical thing. "My name isn't Ava Thorne," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "That identity was created for me, to keep me safe after I left the service." "Left?" Cal interjected, his voice sharp. "Or were declared killed in action after Operation Crimson Storm went sideways." The code name was a punch to the gut. Crimson Storm. The mission that had broken her. The mission that had ended her life. A disastrous embassy extraction in a forgotten corner of the world. A hail of gunfire, the screams of her teammates, the choking dust. The official report said her entire team had been wiped out. She had been a ghost ever since, a casualty of a war no one knew was being fought. "That operation is classified above your pay grade, Commander," she shot back, the military formality returning as naturally as breathing. "It was classified," Cal corrected, his expression grim. "Everything has changed. That's why we're here." He turned to Brody. "Sheriff, I need you to understand. This woman is a highly decorated Tier 1 operator, and her country needs her back." "Needs her for what?" Brody demanded, still standing his ground. "The man who orchestrated Crimson Storm, the man who left her and her team to die, has betrayed us," Cal explained, his voice tight with fury. "General Marcus Thorne." The name hit Ava with the force of a physical blow. General Thorne, not just a high-ranking officer. Her uncle, the man whose political ambitions and cold-hearted calculations had always shadowed her career. The man she had once, long ago, looked up to. "Thorne is selling everything," Cal continued, his words painting a horrifying picture. "Operational details, asset identities, deep cover protocols. He's auctioning off the country's most sensitive secrets to a consortium of our worst enemies. And the centerpiece of that auction is the complete personnel file of every operator involved in Crimson Storm." The implications were staggering. Every survivor, every ghost like her who had been given a new life, was now a target. How many? Ava's voice was a whisper. We don't know for sure, but 3 operators with connections to Crimson Storm have been assassinated in the last 2 months. Clean professional hits. All of them have been living under new identities just like you. The room was silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them all. Martha sank into a chair, her hand over her mouth. Brody looked from Cal to Ava, the pieces of the puzzle finally forming a picture he could never have imagined. "But why you?" Brody asked, his voice hoarse. "Why come all this way for her?" Cal's expression became even more pained. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He slid it across the table to Ava. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. It was a picture of 2 young operators in full desert gear, grinning at the camera, their faces smeared with camo paint and sand. One was a younger version of herself. The other was her brother, Leo, the brother she had watched fall during the firefight, the brother she had mourned for 8 long years. "That's impossible," she breathed, her voice cracking for the first time. "He's dead. I saw him. He was captured," Cal said gently. "Spent 4 years in a black site prison before we could get him out. He's alive, Ava, but he's on Thorne's list. He's being hunted right now as we speak." The world tilted and shattered. 8 years of grief, of guilt, of a life built on the foundation of his sacrifice. All of it was a lie. He was alive, and he was in danger. A storm of emotions, far more violent than the one brewing outside, ripped through her. Joy, so fierce it was painful. Rage, so cold and pure it burned. The quiet waitress, Ava Thorne, died in that moment, consumed by the fire of a sister's love and a warrior's fury. Where is he? The question was not a plea. It was a demand. It was the sound of a weapon being cocked. "Safe house in Virginia," Cal said. "But Thorne's teams are closing in. We think they have hours at most." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Thorne is selling the intel on a private yacht in 2 days. We have to get to it, stop the sale, and take him down. But the yacht is a fortress. The infiltration is impossible for anyone else." He paused. "We need echo." The distant sound of helicopter rotors began to beat against the air. Thorne's people, they were already here. The choice was gone. Her past had not just found her. It had her brother in its jaws. She looked at the photograph, at her brother's smiling face, and then up at Cal. The ice in her eyes had melted, replaced by a burning flame. "What's the mission?" she asked. Echo was back. The rhythmic whop-whop-whop of helicopter blades grew from a distant pulse to an oppressive, thunderous beat that vibrated through the floor of the cafe. They were close. Too close. "Hostiles inbound," one of Cal's men yelled, peering through binoculars. 4 birds, coming in fast from the south. Looks like little birds. Attack formation. Panic, a cold and greasy thing, began to ripple through the few remaining patrons. This wasn't a movie. This was happening in their town, in their cafe. "Everybody out. Back door. Now," Sheriff Evans roared, his voice cutting through the fear. He and Martha began herding the terrified locals towards the kitchen. Cal turned to Ava, his face a mask of grim urgency. "We need to move. Now." Ava's mind was already a whirlwind of tactical calculations. Her quiet life was over, her sanctuary about to become a war zone. But in the chaos, a strange calm settled over her. This, she knew, this was familiar territory. "I need my gear," she said, her voice flat and decisive. "My cabin. 200 yards through the trees." "No time," Cal argued. "We have equipment for you." Ava gave him a look that could cut steel. "You have equipment. I have an arsenal. And I have a way out. Trust me." There was no time to argue. Cal nodded curtly. "Lead the way." They burst out of the cafe's back door into the rain-swept air just as the first helicopter crested the nearby ridge. It was a sleek, black machine bristling with weapon pods. Men in black tactical gear were visible in the open doorways. The sprint to her cabin was a controlled explosion of movement. Ava moved through the familiar woods with a speed and grace that left Cal's seasoned seals struggling to keep pace. She flowed over the terrain, not fighting it, but becoming part of it. The path she had walked leisurely for 8 years, she now covered in under a minute. Behind them, The helicopters began to disgorge their deadly cargo. Ropes dropped, and soldiers began fast roping down into the clearing around the cafe. They reached her porch, the sound of the enemy closing in behind them. 30 seconds. Cal yelled over the roar of the rotors. Ava ignored the front door key. She slammed her boot into a precise spot on the doorframe, a spot that looked no different from the rest of the weathered wood. There was a dull click, and the door swung inward. A hidden release mechanism. Cal's men exchanged looks of disbelief. Inside, the cabin was a picture of rustic simplicity. But Ava moved past the quaint furniture, straight to the massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. She pressed a sequence of stones, a combination known only to her. And with a low groan of grinding gears, the entire hearth rotated inward, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Jesus Christ, one of the SEALs whispered as he followed her down, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The basement was Echo's sanctuary. It was a testament to 8 years of paranoia and preparation. The SEALs, men accustomed to the best armories in the world, stopped dead, their eyes wide with awe. Racks of weapons, crates of ammunition, advanced communication arrays, and detailed topographical maps covering every wall. But Ava had no time for their shock. She moved with a purpose that was terrifying to behold. She went directly to the worn tactical vest hanging on the wall, the one with her call sign stitched into the collar. She strapped it on, the familiar weight settling on her shoulders like a long-lost limb. The movements were automatic, ingrained by 1,000 repetitions in the dark. She grabbed her customized SIG MCX rifle from its rack, the weapon feeling like an extension of her own body. She slammed a magazine into place, the sound sharp and final in the enclosed space. Ceramic body armor plates slid into her vest. Night vision goggles were clipped to a helmet. She stuffed her pockets with spare magazines and high explosive charges. The transformation was complete. The quiet waitress was gone, stripped away to reveal the Tier 1 operator beneath. Ava Thorne was a ghost. Echo was a god of war. Time to go, Cal urged, his own weapon now at the ready. Almost, Ava said, her voice muffled as she pulled a balaclava over her face, leaving only her piercing, ice-blue eyes visible. She pointed to a section of the far wall that looked like solid concrete. That's our exit. She attached a small shaped charge to the wall, set a 5-second timer, and waved them back. Get ready to run. As the timer counted down, she looked at Cal, the man who had trained her, who had led her, who had mourned her. Now, he was following her. The student had become a master. The charge detonated with a deafening crack, blasting a perfectly framed hole in the concrete, revealing a dark, earthen tunnel beyond. The smell of cordite and damp earth filled the air. "Welcome to my world, Commander," Echo said, her voice a low growl. She plunged into the darkness of the tunnel without a backward glance. Try to keep up. Above them, they could hear the sounds of Thorne's soldiers storming her cabin. They were too late. They were hunting a woman who no longer existed, in a place she had already left behind. They were hunting a ghost, and the ghost was now hunting them. The tunnel was a claustrophobic tube of damp earth and darkness, but to Ava, it was a lifeline she had spent years digging. It snaked for a quarter of a mile onto the forest floor, emerging into a dense, primordial thicket of pine and aspen that was nearly impassable to anyone who didn't know its secrets. As they burst out into the gray, rain-soaked daylight, the sounds of the assault on her cabin were already fading behind them. "Impressive," Cal murmured, breathing heavily as he scanned their new surroundings. "You planned for this." "I planned for everything," Echo replied, her voice flat. She was already moving, her rifle at a low ready, her eyes scanning the forest with an intensity that missed nothing. In these mountains, she was no longer the prey. She was the apex predator. This was her hunting ground. For 8 years, she had walked these woods not as a hiker, but as an operator studying terrain. She knew every game trail, every ravine, every natural choke point. She led Cal's team on a path that didn't exist on any map, moving with a silent, fluid grace that made her seem like a part of the forest itself. Comms check, Cal ordered his team. His specialist, a young operator named Torres, pressed a hand to his earpiece. They're locking down the town, Torres reported, his voice tense. Setting up a perimeter on all major roads. They're treating this like a military occupation. Ava wasn't surprised. Thorne was thorough. He wouldn't just send a team to kill her. He would send a force to dissect her life, to sanitize the area, to ensure that not a single trace of her existence remained. They moved for 20 minutes, climbing higher into the rugged terrain. Ava finally held up a closed fist, the universal signal for a halt. The team froze, melting into the undergrowth. Ahead, through the dense trees, she could see movement. 2 soldiers in full tactical gear were moving cautiously along an old logging road. Patrol, she whispered in her throat mic, they're good. Ex-military, private contractors by the look of their gear. But they're moving by the book. That's their mistake. We can bypass them, Cal suggested, his focus on the primary mission. We can't afford to engage. We can't afford not to, Echo countered, her voice dangerously quiet. She pointed down the mountain, back towards Havenwood. They're between us and the town. Between us and civilians. They're a threat that needs to be neutralized. She looked at Cal, her eyes burning with a cold fire. Those people down there, Martha, Brody, they protected me for 8 years, even if they didn't know it. I will not let them become collateral damage in my war. Before Cal could argue, she was gone. She didn't run. She seemed to dissolve into the shadows of the forest, a wraith of vengeance. The 2 contractors never stood a chance. They were scanning the woods ahead, looking for a team of 5. They never thought to look for a single, silent ghost appearing directly behind them. There was no gunfire, just a whisper of movement, a muffled grunt, a thud. 30 seconds later, Echo emerged from the trees, wiping a combat knife clean on her pants. The 2 soldiers were unconscious, zip-tied, and hidden in a thicket so dense they wouldn't be found for days. The youngest member of Cal's team, a SEAL named Williams, just stared, his mouth slightly agape. I've never seen anything like that, he breathed. The stories don't do her justice, Cal said, a note of awe in his own voice. Echo was already stripping the captured soldiers of their radios and tactical data pads. She worked with a detached, clinical efficiency. They're running a standard grid search, she reported, her eyes scanning the data. Command frequency is encrypted, but it's a standard algorithm. Torres, can you crack it? Give me a minute, the comms specialist said, already plugging a device into the captured radio. As Torres worked, a new transmission came through on the open channel, a situation report from one of the teams in the town. The voice was cold and professional. Alpha Team to command. We have secured the primary civilian assets from the cafe. The owner, Martha Jensen, and the local law enforcement officer, Brody Evans, are in custody, awaiting instructions for information extraction. The words hit Echo like a physical blow. Information extraction, a sterile euphemism for interrogation, for torture. They had Martha, they had Brody. A rage, colder and more profound than anything she had ever felt, settled over her. Her personal war had just become a rescue mission. The last vestiges of her fear, of her desire to run, were burned away by a white-hot, protective fury. Torres suddenly looked up, his face pale. I'm in. I'm listening to their command net. He paused, his eyes widening. Oh my God, they're taking the civilians to the community center. They're calling it a processing facility. Echo looked up from the data pad, her ice blue eyes seeming to glow with a terrifying light. She looked at Cal, but she wasn't asking for permission. She was giving an order. Change of plans, Commander, she said, her voice a low, deadly growl. The mission is no longer the yacht. The mission is Havenwood. We're going back down, and we're going to burn them to the ground. She began moving, not away from the enemy, but directly towards them. She was no longer a ghost running from her past. She was a storm about to break over the men who had dared to touch her home. That's suicide, Echo. Cal's voice was a harsh whisper through the comms as they moved swiftly through the treacherous, rain-slicked terrain. They have a fortified position, dozens of men, and civilian hostages. A direct assault is tactical insanity. Insanity is what they're counting on us to avoid. Echo shot back, not breaking her stride. She moved with a predatory certainty, descending the mountain with a speed that defied the dangerous conditions. Thorn knows how we're trained. He expects a strategic retreat. He expects us to prioritize the primary objective, the intel sale. He's using those people, my people, as a shield, betting I won't risk the mission for them. Her voice dropped, laced with venom. He bet wrong. Her plan was forming, a high-risk strategy born from a deep understanding of her enemy's mind. They're not expecting a counterattack. Not this fast. We have the element of surprise. She pointed to a topographical map on her wrist-mounted display. There's an old, abandoned ranger station 2 miles from here. It has a long-range communication array. Federal emergency frequencies. It's our best shot at contacting outside support. A network I've kept dormant for years. They'll be watching it. One of Cal's men, Reeves, pointed out. It's a logical objective. Exactly. Echo said, a grim smile touching her lips. And we're going to give them exactly what they expect. The approach to the ranger station was a masterclass in stealth and tension. They moved through the last mile like ghosts, using every dip in the terrain, every shadow for cover. The station itself sat in a small clearing, looking silent and abandoned. Too silent. Ava halted the team 50 yards out, concealed in a line of ancient pine trees. She scanned the area through her rifle scope, her senses on fire. Something's wrong, she breathed. No wildlife. No birdsong. The forest is holding its breath. Cal scanned the building with thermal optics. I've got nothing. It looks clear. It's a trap, she stated, her certainty absolute. They're in there, waiting. She pointed to a specific window on the second floor. The glass. There's a faint distortion. A sniper's hide. They've set up a kill box. Thorne's men were not just grunts. They were professionals. They had anticipated her move, predicted her objective. They had turned her own logic against her. Just as she spoke, the trap was sprung. The quiet forest erupted in a cacophony of suppressed gunfire. Muzzle flashes winked from a dozen concealed positions around the clearing. Rounds zipped through the air with deadly hisses, tearing bark from the trees they were using as cover. Contact front. Contact right. Cal yelled, his team returning fire with disciplined bursts. The firefight was sudden, brutal, and intimate. But Echo was already moving. While Cal's team laid down a base of fire, she flanked left, a gray shadow against the gray rocks. This was her element. The chaos of combat was where she was most alive. She neutralized the first sniper post with 2 perfectly placed shots, the silenced report of her rifle barely audible over the din of the battle. As she moved to the next position, Torres's voice crackled over the comms, filled with urgency. I've got more from their command net. It's not just about killing you. The objective has been updated. Thorne wants you alive. The news sent a chill down Ava's spine that had nothing to do with the rain. What do you mean? She demanded, dropping another enemy soldier as he tried to reposition. He's calling it an asset behavior analysis, Torres explained, his voice strained. He doesn't just want to sell your file. He wants to sell you. Your methods, your psychology, your survival strategies. He wants to capture you to study how you've adapted over the last 8 years. He's planning to sell the mind of Echo to the highest bidder. The monstrousness of it, the sheer clinical evil, was staggering. He wasn't just betraying his country. He was trying to weaponize her very soul. He was going to dissect her life in Havenwood, her friendships with Martha and Brody, her routines, her quiet moments, and turn it all into a product for America's enemies. And then came the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. Command to all units. A cold voice said over the frequency Torres was monitoring. Phase 2 is authorized. Begin enhanced interrogation of the civilian assets. We need leverage. Break the Waitress's attachments. Start with the old woman. Start with the old woman. Martha. Something inside Ava broke. The cold, calculating operator was consumed by a firestorm of pure, undiluted rage. The mission, the strategy, the risks, it all burned away, leaving only one incandescent purpose. That's it, she whispered, her voice a lethal calm that was more terrifying than any scream. She stopped flanking. She stopped using cover. She stood up. "Echo, what are you doing?" "Get down!" Cal screamed. But she was already moving forward, walking directly into the kill box. She walked through the storm of bullets as if they were raindrops, her rifle barking with a steady, relentless rhythm. 2 shots, 2 hostiles down. A turn, another burst, another enemy silenced. She wasn't just fighting anymore. She was executing. It was impossible. It defied all tactics, all logic. But it was happening. She was a vengeful spirit, an angel of death walking through the valley of her own making. The remaining ambushers, seasoned professionals, faltered. Their discipline broke in the face of this supernatural assault. They were no longer fighting a soldier. They were fighting a legend. And the legend was coming to kill them all. The firefight at the ranger station ended as quickly as it began. Echo's audacious, single-handed charge had shattered the enemy's morale and cohesion. When the last shot faded, leaving only the sound of the rain and their own ragged breathing, Cal's team emerged from cover to a scene of absolute carnage. Echo stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by neutralized hostiles, her rifle smoking. She was untouched. What the hell was that? Williams breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and reverence. That, Cal said, his voice grim, was a choice. Echo ignored them. Her focus already shifted. She strode into the ranger station, heading directly for the communication array. The rage was still there, a white-hot coal in her chest, but it was now channeled, focused into a diamond-hard point of strategic brilliance. They had threatened Martha. They had made it personal. Now, she would show them what personal really meant. "They think they can use my attachments against me," she said, her fingers flying across the comms panel, her voice dangerously calm. "So, I'm going to use their assumptions against them." She looked up at Cal, her eyes burning with an almost insane clarity. "They want the asset? They're going to get her." Cal frowned, not understanding. "What are you talking about?" "I'm going to surrender," she said. The statement hung in the air, so contrary to everything they had just witnessed that for a moment, no one spoke. "You're what?" Reeves finally managed, incredulous. "Not Echo," she clarified, a razor-sharp smile touching her lips. "Echo is a ghost. They can't catch a ghost. But Ava Thorne, she's just a terrified waitress caught in the middle of a nightmare. She's scared. She's broken. And she's willing to do anything to save her friends." Cal's eyes widened as he grasped the sheer audacity of her plan. "A Trojan horse," he whispered. "Exactly," Echo confirmed. "Thorne's commander on the ground. Whoever he is, he's been briefed on my psychological profile. He expects me to fight to the death. He'll never anticipate a surrender. It goes against the legend." She began stripping off her tactical gear, the vest, the helmet, the weapons, until she stood in just her simple civilian clothes. She looked like Ava Thorne again, but it was a chilling transformation, like a wolf putting on a sheepskin. While they're busy parading their prize, while they're focused on me, their security will be at its most vulnerable. That's when you hit them. Her plan was simple, elegant, and lethally effective. They're holding the hostages at the community center. I know the layout. Every entrance, every blind spot. Once I'm inside, I'll be your eyes and ears. You'll create a diversion, a big one. Something that forces them to split their forces. When they do, I'll make my move on the inside. You move on the outside. We crush them between us. It was a plan that relied on perfect timing, nerves of steel, and the enemy completely underestimating their captive. It was a plan that could only work if the woman at its center was capable of portraying absolute terror while being the most dangerous person in the room. "It's too risky," Cal argued, though his voice lacked conviction. He knew she was right. The alternative is a frontal assault on a fortified building full of hostages. Echo countered coldly. "My way, we control the narrative. We use their own arrogance as a weapon." She picked up a single, small combat knife and a garrote wire, concealing them in her boots and the waistband of her jeans. She also kept a tiny, encrypted transponder, no bigger than a button. "This will give you my exact location inside the building. When I activate it twice, that's the signal. The diversion starts. When I activated a third time, the party starts. She took a deep breath, and the warrior vanished. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes filled with a carefully crafted fear. Her breathing became shallow. In the space of a few seconds, the formidable Echo was gone, replaced by the broken, terrified Ava Thorne. The performance was so convincing it was chilling. She looked at Cal, her eyes wide with mock terror. "What do I do?" Cal played his part. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not brutal. He keyed the captured radio to the enemy's command frequency. "This is Commander Mitchell of the United States Navy," he announced, his voice filled with false defeat. "We are ceasing hostile actions. The asset, Ava Thorne, is willing to surrender to ensure the safety of the civilian hostages." The radio was silent for a long moment. Then, a new voice came through, cold and triumphant. "A wise decision, Commander. Bring her to the main road. Unarmed. We'll take it from there." Echo gave Cal a final, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was set. The horse was at the gates of Troy, and the men inside were about to learn a very hard lesson. Never, ever threaten a ghost home. The surrender was a carefully staged piece of theater. Ava, appearing small and defeated between two of Cal's imposing seals, was marched to the main road. A black Yukon screeched to a halt, and 4 of Thorne's soldiers disembarked, their weapons trained on the small group. They roughly zip-tied Ava's hands, threw a black hood over her head, and shoved her into the vehicle. The last thing she heard before the doors slammed shut was the enemy commander's voice over the radio, dripping with arrogance. "The package is secure. I repeat, Echo is in the box." The ride to the community center was short and silent. Ava focused on her breathing, maintaining the illusion of terror while her mind was a cold, clear map of the coming battle. She cataloged the number of men, the sound of their weapons, the route they took. When they dragged her out of the vehicle, she stumbled, playing her part. They pulled the hood from her head inside the main hall of the Havenwood Community Center. The large room, usually home to town meetings and bake sales, had been transformed into a military command post. Tactical gear was strewn about, and armed guards stood at every door and window. And in the center of the room, tied to folding chairs, were Martha and Sheriff Brody Evans. Martha's face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were defiant. Brody looked bruised and furious, straining against his bonds. "Ava!" Martha cried out, her voice a mixture of fear and relief. A guard stepped forward and silenced her with a sharp command. A man in his late 40s, with the cold eyes of a predator, stepped in front of Ava. He had the hard, chiseled look of a career special operator. A colonel's insignia was pinned to his tactical vest. "Colonel Reed," he introduced himself, his voice a low growl. "I read your file, Echo. Or should I say, Ava? I have to admit, you're not what I expected." He circled her, like a shark studying its prey. "The legend is bigger." Ava kept her eyes downcast, her body trembling. "Please," she whimpered, "don't hurt them. I'll do whatever you want." Reed laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, we know. The general wants a full debrief. He's very interested in how a ghost spends her retirement." He nodded to his men. "Prep the civilians for transport. The general wants them moved to a more secure location for Phase 3. I'll handle the asset personally." Phase 3. The information clicked into place in Ava's mind. They were planning to move the hostages. Her window of opportunity was closing fast. It was time. Through the large windows of the hall, she saw the first sign of Cal's diversion. A massive explosion rocked the far side of town, a plume of black smoke billowing into the rainy sky. It was the old, abandoned sawmill. Cal had chosen his target well. Reed spun around. "What the hell was that?" he barked in his radio. The response was panicked. "Command post is under attack. I repeat, we are under heavy fire. Multiple hostiles. Requesting immediate backup." Reed made the exact, predictable mistake Ava had counted on. Arrogance. He believed the primary threat was contained. He believed he was in control. "Take half the team," he ordered his lieutenant. "Reinforce the CP. I'll hold this position. Go!" 6 of the 12 guards in the room scrambled out, piling into a vehicle and speeding off towards the chaos. leaving 6 men to guard 2 hostages and 1 broken waitress. The odds had just shifted dramatically. Ava subtly pressed the button on the transponder in her pocket for the 3rd time. The party starts. Reed turned back to her, a cruel smile on his face. "Now, where were we? Let's talk about your life here, Ava. Let's talk about your friends." Actually, a new voice said. It was cold, clear, and utterly devoid of fear. Reed frowned, confused. The voice had come from the woman in front of him. He looked down. Ava Thorne was gone. Her head was up, her shoulders were back, and her eyes were filled with a light that made his blood run cold. It was the look of a killer. "The stories," Echo said, her lips curling into a terrifying smile, "were underestimated. What happened next was not a fight. It was a symphony of violence, executed in less than 90 seconds. She snapped the zip ties binding her wrists with a single, explosive flex of muscle. Before Reed could even process what was happening, she had the knife from her boot in her hand. She moved not like a person, but like a force of nature. The first guard went down with a knife in his throat, a silent, gurgling gasp. She used his falling body as a shield, drawing her garrote wire as the second guard raised his rifle. The wire whipped out, catching him around the neck, pulling him off balance. A brutal twist, and he collapsed. 2 down in 5 seconds. The remaining 4 opened fire, but they were shooting at a ghost. She was a blur of motion, using the tables and chairs as both cover and weapons. She kicked a heavy oak table into 2 of them, sending them sprawling, then closed the distance. A series of lightning-fast, brutal strikes with her hands and feet, and they were unconscious, or worse. The last guard stood near Martha and Brody, his hands trembling as he tried to aim his rifle at the whirlwind of death that had just consumed his team. Echo didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy glass coffee pot from a nearby table, a relic of the bake sale, and threw it with pinpoint accuracy. It shattered against his head, and he crumpled to the floor. Silence. The only sound was the distant echo of Cal's diversion and the dripping of rain. Colonel Reed stood frozen, his hand halfway to his sidearm, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He had read the file. He had heard the legends. But the reality of Echo was something no file could ever capture. She turned to face him, the bloody knife held loosely in her hand. Her eyes were calm, her breathing even. "You wanted to talk about my friends," she said, her voice a deadly whisper. "Let's talk." She moved towards him, and the legendary Colonel Reed, a man who had fought in a dozen war zones, knew for the first time in his life what it truly meant to be afraid. She cut Martha and Brody free, her hands gentle now. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this," she said, her voice soft. Martha looked at the woman she had known for 8 years, at the carnage surrounding them, and saw her for the first time. You're not a waitress, are you?" Echo looked at her, and her smile was sad, but edged with steel. "I'm whatever I need to be," she said, "to protect the people I care about." Outside, the sounds of battle intensified. Cal's team was engaging the rest of Thorne's forces. The battle for Havenwood was won, but Echo knew the war was just beginning. The aftermath in the community center was a surreal tableau of controlled chaos. While Cal's team systematically dismantled the remainder of Thorne's ground forces throughout Havenwood, Echo worked with a chilling efficiency. She used Reed, now her terrified and compliant prisoner, to access the enemy's tactical network. The intelligence she pulled was a goldmine. It confirmed the location of the intel sale, a high-tech, 300-foot super yacht named the Chimera, currently holding position in international waters off the California coast. The most critical piece of information, however, was personal. Her brother, Leo, was not in a safe house. He was on the yacht. Thorne was using him as the ultimate bargaining chip, a live demonstration of the asset he was selling. He was the prize pig at the auction. "We need to move now," Echo said, her voice leaving no room for argument. The rescue of Havenwood was a victory, but it was just the opening skirmish. The main battle was less than 24 hours away. Through her dormant network, she arranged for transport. AC-130, flying without a transponder from a decommissioned airbase, picked them up from a remote stretch of highway outside Havenwood. The flight to a black site on the California coast was tense and silent. The mission profile was insane. Infiltrate a floating fortress, neutralize a rogue general and his private army, rescue a hostage, and secure intelligence that could cripple U.S. special operations for a generation. 24 hours later, they were on a repurposed fishing trawler, pitching in the dark, rolling waves of the Pacific. The salt spray was cold on Ava's face. Through night vision binoculars, she could see the Chimera. It was a beacon of light in the black ocean, a pleasure craft on the surface, but she knew it was bristling with military-grade defenses, anti-missile systems, sonar nets, and a small army of mercenaries. "How do we get on that thing?" Williams asked, his voice barely a whisper over the engine's thrum. "They'll expect an attack from the air or a fast boat approach," Echo said, her eyes never leaving the target. "They're looking for a frontal assault. They won't be looking down." She pointed to the waterline. "I'm going in underwater. That's a 2-mile swim in open ocean at night against currents and patrols," Cal stated, his face grim. "It's a suicide mission." "Then they won't be expecting it," she replied simply. She was already stripping down to a dive skin, her movements fluid and practiced. This was her world, the impossible mission, the calculated risk. "You and the team will create a diversion. A big one. Make them think you're trying a brute force boarding from the north. Draw their eyes. I'll use the chaos to go in from the south, through the service bay." "An extraction?" Cal asked. "One impossibility at a time." "Commander," she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "First, I get my brother back." The swim was a descent into a cold, black hell. The pressure, the darkness, the crushing silence broken only by the sound of her own breathing through the rebreather. But she moved with the grim determination of a shark, her focus narrowed to a single point, the yacht. She reached the hull, a sheer wall of steel, and attached herself with magnetic clamps. Bypassing the security on the service bay hatch was a delicate, nerve-wracking process, but her fingers were steady. She slipped inside the belly of the beast, a ghost made of water and shadow. The lower decks were a maze of corridors and engine rooms. She moved silently, a phantom in the machine, following the muffled sounds of voices and music from the upper decks. She found what she was looking for in the yacht's main salon. Through a ventilation grate, she saw it all. The room was filled with the worst of the world's villains. Arms dealers, rogue intelligence chiefs, terrorists. And at the head of a long, polished table stood her uncle, General Marcus Thorne, looking every bit the triumphant businessman. "As you can see, gentlemen," Thorne was saying, gesturing to a large screen displaying classified files. "These assets are the pinnacle of American military training. Their skills, their psych profiles, all for sale." Then they brought him in. Leo. He was bruised and gaunt, but his eyes were defiant. He was bound to a chair, a living trophy. "And this," Thorne announced with a flourish, "is the crown jewel. Chief Petty Officer Leo Martinez, a survivor of Crimson Storm, with intimate knowledge of our deep cover protocols." He looked at Leo with cold disdain. His sister, the legendary Echo, was unfortunately killed yesterday, attempting to evade capture. A shame. She would have fetched a higher price. The lie was designed to break Leo, to sell a story of total victory. Through the grate, Ava saw the flicker of despair in her brother's eyes. She keyed her throat mic, transmitting on a short-range frequency she and Leo had used as an emergency channel on their last mission together. A simple, coded burst of static. Not words, just a signal. "I am here." Leo's head snapped up. His eyes, sharp and trained, scanned the room, searching. They locked onto the ventilation grate. For a fraction of a second, his despair was replaced by a look of fierce, incredulous hope. He knew. "Let us begin the bidding," Thorne said, smiling to his guests. Ava had seen enough. She armed the 2 flashbang grenades she carried. It was time to crash the party. "General," her voice, amplified by the ventilation system, echoed through the silent, opulent room. Every head turned, searching for the source. Thorne's face went pale. "You forgot to mention one thing about your crown jewel." The disembodied voice of the ghost he thought he'd killed continued. He comes with a very protective sister. She dropped the grenades. The world erupted in a blinding flash of white light and a deafening roar. The auction was over. The war for her brother's life had just begun. The chaos in the salon was absolute. As the flashbangs detonated, Sierra dropped from the ceiling vent, a wraith descending into a den of stunned and blinded vipers. She moved with an economy of motion that was both beautiful and terrifying, her silenced pistol and combat knife working in concert. It wasn't a firefight, it was a harvest. Her first priority was Leo. She cut him free while Cal's team, using the massive explosion as their cue, began their assault on the yacht's exterior. The battle for the Chimera was swift and brutal. The final confrontation took place on the bridge. It was just her, Leo, and their uncle. The man who had betrayed his country, his honor, and his own blood. "It's over, Marcus," Ava said, her weapon steady. Thorne laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "You think this ends here? The data has already been transmitted to a dozen deadman switches. You can't stop it all. We'll hunt down every last piece," Leo snarled, standing beside his sister, a united front. "And we'll hunt down everyone you sold it to." The fight was short and personal, a brutal, close-quarter struggle that ended with General Thorne disarmed and defeated, his empire crumbling around him. As dawn broke, the yacht was swarmed by U.S. Navy vessels. The intelligence was secured, the buyers were in custody, and Thorne was in chains. Standing on the deck of a Navy destroyer, wrapped in a blanket, Ava watched the sun rise over the Pacific. Leo stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. They were bruised and exhausted, but they were together. They were alive. A woman in a crisp uniform approached them. It was a face from Ava's past, her old commanding officer. "Chief Thorne," she said, her voice filled with respect. "The President sends his personal gratitude. Your official record has been corrected. You're no longer a ghost. You have a choice. You can come back in, write your own ticket, or you can have any life you want." Ava looked out at the endless ocean, then back at her brother. For 8 years, she had been hiding. She had been running from a past that was built on a lie. Now, she was free. "What are you thinking?" Leo asked softly. A real, genuine smile touched Ava's lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'm thinking," she said, "that Martha is probably wondering who's going to open up the cafe. The morning rush starts in a few hours." She was going back. Not to hide, but to live. Some ghosts are meant to become legends. Others are meant to find their way home. What do you think Ava's next chapter will look like? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, so please comment with respect. And if you want more stories about heroes hiding in plain sight, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.